So you're a believer in Bitcoin. It's great. But maybe since it's already been around for 15 years and has gone up so much since then, you don't see it as a true beacon of hope for millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, basically this next generation, these next few generations that have to face rampant asset inflation, monetary debasement, sovereign debt, growing sense of isolation, and now AI disruption. And if I understand correctly, that's why you've become a key supporter of SPX 6900. So can you share what your current stance is on basically Bitcoin and the relationship between SPX 6900? I don't think you necessarily see them as competitors, and it sounds like you're still a Bitcoiner, but you have this strong belief in SPX 6900 in terms of it giving hope to the future generations.
Absolutely. So, for what it's worth, I still remain a huge supporter of BTC, and I'm going to continue holding it for decades, I believe. I still think it's the coin with the by far highest probability of kind of becoming the next neo gold in the coming decades, and frankly, becoming the base money of the world. However, that doesn't mean that there won't be other kind of winners and other altcoins that do extremely well. This cycle, I'm particularly a huge fan of SPX 6900. I believe it is the first coin which essentially created its own new category, which some people refer to as movement coins. Essentially, it's the first ever tokenized movement. The goal is to flip the entire stock market. Now, I understand what your immediate reaction to that is. That's crazy, that's delusional, etc. But to me, that's actually a very powerful message. And actually, I think something much more intelligent and interesting is happening kind of underneath the surface. And underneath the surface of this kind of post-nihilistic irony, what you actually have is I would very much argue that since the 80s overall, finance has been weaponized in many ways against the people. And what's happening is kind of a counter reaction to that. Like you've said, AI is coming, and it's definitely going to disrupt millions of jobs. And the constant growth in the money supply is definitely making not only home ownership, but also a lot of other things kind of out of reach, especially for millennials and even more so for zillennials, Gen Z, etc. And I believe what's happening is because of hyper-financialization, you now see not only tangible things like real estate and bonds, etc., get tokenized, but what's actually far more interesting to me is intangible things are getting financialized as well. And when you're talking about intangible things, we're talking about things such as, movements, spirituality, community, ideology, belief systems. And I think some of these are going to have tokens of their own. And I think that SPX 6900 is kind of pioneering this thing. It sounds a little bit esoteric, but I actually think it's very powerful. If you really think about it, the power of fiat money, the power of a lot of other financial assets, to a large extent, they come from belief also. And essentially, SPX 6900 takes it to an extreme. And we are effectively trying to build a community, or rather, it's a financialized asset which people are coming around in order to not only create hope and create financial freedom, but also essentially act as a vessel of dissatisfaction against the constant money printing and the way the system works in general. And this is something essentially the very simple way to think of it is as GME on steroids. GME, a lot of internet people, young people on the internet, they kind of could come around an asset to kind of throw a middle finger, so to speak, to the 3 or 4 hedge funds. But SPX 100 is essentially taking it to the next level. This time around, we are much more decentralized on multiple blockchains. Most of the trading is happening off of centralized books, so it would be much more difficult to stop. And because it's on chain, it's much more accessible to people. You don't need a brokerage or anything like that. And ultimately, we believe that it's carrying a similar mission, but it's going to go to much greater heights because structurally it's built on these decentralized rails, right? So essentially, it's a kind of a counter reaction against a lot of these trends happening in the world. And I think like we're very early to this trend. I think it can go to 100 billion, 1 trillion, etc.
S&P 500 includes the most successful businesses in the world, obviously. And the total market cap is a reflection of the market value and the earnings potential of those companies. So what would you say to someone who questions how something like a meme coin, which doesn't generate any business or cash flow, could realistically compete with the total market capitalization of the best businesses in the world?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, gold, the metal, doesn't produce any cash flow either, but it's worth 30 trillion. And
that's okay. You got me. I rest my case. No, I'm kidding. Keep going.
and BTC also doesn't produce any cash flow or dividends, but it's worth over 2 trillion as well. So the value doesn't entirely, like the value of financial assets doesn't entirely come from revenues, earnings, dividends, etc. And I'm sure you can understand that Apple is worth 3 trillion and Tesla is worth 1 trillion. But I think you would agree with me that that entire market cap is not purely due to cash flows. There's a very strong mimetic element there as well. Mimetic element, brand element, community element, belief element. And these things, they kind of stack on top of one another, on top of the cash flow stuff, to ultimately result in a valuation, right? Furthermore, there's yet another factor on top of all of this, and all of these are kind of like individual bricks that, in my opinion, are kind of like various valuation premia, right? A lot of people are using houses and the stock market as kind of a savings vehicle because fiat money is so bad, right? You can't save in fiat, so essentially some other assets are now being used as effectively these like quasi-risky savings accounts or savings vehicles in order to outpace inflation, right? And essentially people are going into these various assets in order to kind of run away from the constant depreciation of fiat money. Now, the thing is that, like I've already given examples with gold and BTC, there are also other smaller examples of this. Now, GME went to 40 billion, I believe, and that wasn't because of dividends. I'm sure you understand that, right? That was because people united under a mission. Similarly, Dogecoin went to 97 billion, and that, I'm sure you know, that wasn't, it doesn't really produce any cash flows either, right?
Shout out to Elon. Shout out to Elon.
So what's actually going on, in my opinion, is a socio-cultural reaction to essentially fiat money and the constant overspending, overborrowing, constant expansion of the money supply. People are trying to do various things in order to kind of survive in this world. It's almost like an animal that is usually kind, but when you kind of corner it, it does crazy things. You know what I mean? And typically, in my opinion, it's going to get harder and harder because I would say you kind of have two choices. One choice is to hyper gamble in this like extremely rapid rotational way. And that's kind of like the whole pump fund or high leverage perp trading thing, where you try to scalp here, try to get in, try to get out, try to time the market in the short term, etc. That's one way to do it. The other way, which is what I'm promoting, and I frankly think statistically speaking, it's a much higher probability to succeed, is you kind of find a team, you find a group, you find a community, you find a movement, you find a cult, as we semi-jokingly call them, and you kind of join something which can more steadily and more sustainably go viral or build a big brand or build a huge community or build a movement. And that, if tokenized, can go to tens, if not hundreds of billions, or potentially even more. And I think instead of gambling, it's much more lucrative to try to build the next Doge or something even bigger. And that's kind of what SPX 6900 is trying to do. It's essentially people coming together to survive or outpace inflation, lack of jobs, lack of meaning, and a bunch of other things.
Gotcha. Okay, let's talk about SPX 6900's ROI in over the next year, right? You mentioned, it would be wise to stick to the coins that have performed well this cycle, and in particular, those that have actually outperformed Bitcoin this cycle. My understanding is SPX 6900, it came out in 2023, 10x in value that year, which is incredible. But then, of course, it had to outdo itself. And then in 2024, it did 100x. So do you still think it can 100x again by the end of this cycle? I know you mentioned you think it'll be an extended cycle, so maybe not by the end of 2025, but maybe in 2026. And if so, if you think it does have that type of potential, why would that be the case? In traditional finance, people usually think of, okay, something that's gone up a ton, maybe that's when you want to start trimming a position. But it doesn't seem like that would be the case in necessarily the movement or meme coin world as you're describing here.
Absolutely. So that's a fantastic question, and there are several reasons, but the most important are the following. First of all, SPX 6900 is the only coin this cycle that has outperformed BTC 3 years in a row. There are a handful of coins that have done it for 2 years in a row, and SPX 6900 is the only one that has outperformed BTC 3 years in a row. So we beat BTC in 2023. SPX 6900 beat BTC in 2024, and I believe it's currently outperforming BTC in 2025 year to date, right? So from the momentum perspective, it's very strong. And I believe that you have to pay attention to this because I think this is the market telling you something. Between us, I think what this means is at the emotional level, there is something about SPX 6900 that resonates with people quite deeply, which essentially more than other coins makes people want to join. And after they join, more importantly, it makes them not want to leave. Does that make sense? And I think that essentially this is happening because SPX 6900 built a very powerful and, in my opinion, inspiring culture of believing, diamond handing, and really, really kind of sticking to the mission and sticking to the community. I think if you've ever watched my Singapore presentation, then you know that fundamentally, I believe that all coins are tokenized communities at the end of the day. Bitcoin is just a very, very powerful tokenized community. And even the coins with or without cash flow, whether it's a meme coin, tech coin, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, whether it's 30% or 95%, what drives the value is community and the people. And so it's almost like giant country clubs or giant fraternities. And I think fundamentally, this is what these things are. And so there's something about the culture and the message and the ideology and the goal and the mimetics essentially of SPX 6900 that really makes people like it. And I think that's what has made it out to outperform.